What if I told you that the key to becoming more intelligent and thinking more clearly lies in a simple medieval principle from the 1300s? Well, William of Occam, a philosopher, discovered a principle we now call Occam's razor. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use it on a daily basis to think more rationally, think more clearly than 99% of people. And I'm going to draw upon my years of experience as a published academic and as an entrepreneur to do so. So let's dive into it. So what exactly is Occam's razor in the first place? And why is it so helpful for rational thinking and rational decision making? Well, it's the principle, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. And of course, that sounds very, very out there because it's medieval language, I guess. But what it means is something very, very simple. And it means that think about how we go through life, attributing explanations to things. Think about, let's say, somebody cutting us off in traffic. Right? How do we attribute the explanation? A lot of the time we attribute the explanation the following way. We think this person cut us off because they're a jerk, but could there be other explanations? Well, of course, there are always so many different explanations that we are not considering. It could be that they're really late for work. It could be that the person has a pregnant wife and that they're rushing to the hospital because of that. There could be so many different explanations as to why something happens in our lives, but that's called the fundamental attribution error, by the way, in psychology. But what we want to explore to overcome this and think more clearly and get better explanations, we want to think about Occam's razor and how to use it, how to use this principle. Now, there are ways that this has been conceived. It's been conceived in the wrong way in many cases, right? There is a misconception here that this means, especially in business, all my entrepreneurs, you guys think about this concept a lot of the time in admittedly a wrong way, okay? So, and I know because I've been in entrepreneurship for more than 12 years now. And how in entrepreneurship we always hear, and in many, many industries, we always hear, well, choose the simplest route. The simplest explanation, the simplest approach is usually the best one. And yes, there is a lot of truth to that, but it's not always the best one. Right? Sometimes the more complex approach is actually the better approach. Case in point, just the fact of human agency, all right? There was a theory called behaviorism in the 1960s, before the 1960s came along. The 1960s was the cognitive revolution in psychology, and behaviorism before then, we saw the problem of complexity in psychology. And so a lot of behaviorists, people were tired of all this complexity. And essentially, I'm boiling it down and simplifying it. But they said, okay, well, let's get rid of the mind altogether. Let's get rid of this idea of mind and just look at behavior and just make models, predictive models based on that. And lo and behold, over time, we started to realize, well, that even though that's the simplest explanation, there's a lot we still can't explain. Right? There's still a lot we can't predict based on just eliminating the mind. So we had to introduce something that's admittedly very complex, which is the human mind, back into psychology. And that's a good example of when sometimes the more complex approach is better. But then why is, that's a clear case of where sometimes we want to use the more complex approach, but then in what order? Like, how do we use this principle then if sometimes the more complex approach is better? And it doesn't just mean the simplest explanation is always the best. Well, what it means is we simply want to try eliminating the simplest possibility first. This principle, Occam's razor, all has to do with the order in which we reason, the order in which we reason out possible explanations for things. Just like the example of being cut off in traffic, somebody cutting you off in traffic. What is the simplest explanation? Let's start by trying to eliminate that first, right? And same thing here. We should always try to eliminate it first. So what does it mean in that sense? We should always try to eliminate the simplest one first. Well, it's actually the same way science works. In fact, Occam's razor, way back in the 1300s, it contained kind of like the seeds of the scientific method. all the way up to Francis Bacon, all the way up to, scientists, scientific minds after that period, started to think about, how do we find out the truth? How do we find the truth in the world in general, right? And so in science, we have to have some methodical approach. We can't just say, well, I think it's this that's explaining that, or I think it's that, right? That's what we call a hypothesis. We start there. But which hypothesis should we start with, right? There are many possible explanations for why something is happening, why it's occurring. So, and in principle, we can test, and it's totally valid to test any hypothesis or any explanation. But in real life, we don't always have the time and the convenience to try to test every plausible or whatever explanation. So what this means is the entire objective of the scientific method is to systematically eliminate entities. Start with the simplest explanation, try to eliminate that first, and whatever is left over, whether it's the more complex explanation or approach, it could be in business, could be in professional life, or what's ever left over, which could be the simplest approach, whatever is left over is the most probable explanation. Or you could say, again, if you're in a work situation, business situation, what's the best approach, right? And that's how we do it. We have to do it methodically. Try eliminating the simplest one first, and that's how we come up with a conclusion. So let's take some actual examples from everyday life. Well, health and fitness, right? Why am I tired all the time, right? So maybe I have a rare medical condition. My iron levels are off. There's mold in my apartment. A lot of times we get to, the most extreme version of this is hypochondria, right? Where you're always thinking that you're always sick, right? And many people are hypochondriacs. Or you have some off-the-wall explanation. I'm sure you even know people like this if you don't think like this yourself, right? What is the takeaway, right? So don't try to eliminate the complex, right? Don't try waste your time. You're going to waste time, a lot of time, trying to investigate all of these other possibilities. Why don't you just try getting better sleep first, and maybe even not staying up too late, or addressing things in your diet first, and then see if that works, right? Sometimes we're just overlooking some of the obvious. Or if you're like me, I already know I need to stop drinking so much coffee, but there's a difference between knowing and following through. So that's my little advice. And if you could drop it in the comments what you think I should do to stop drinking so much coffee. I know the answer is just stop drinking so much coffee, but I love my coffee. Anyway, but I don't think I overdo it. Number 2, dating and relationships. Why haven't they texted me back? Why haven't they texted me back? So maybe they lost their phone, they're testing me, they're too nervous to respond, right? Well, it depends. You have to actually think, what is the simplest explanation? Maybe they're just not into you. In terms of dating or relationships, there could be, this could be the simplest explanation. Sometimes, if somebody's really into you, I think dating, right, wise, then they'll jump at the chance to text back to you, right? So that might be the simplest explanation. I think more in kind of like social explanations. What I've noticed, because I've been in sales, I've had lots of sales experience for years. When people don't text back, usually it's just because they're busy. They're busy. Their lives are consumed, and you're not their number one priority. So that is the simplest explanation. And so what steps do you take based on that? Well, usually what I would do is just follow up in a very kind and professional way at different intervals, right? Maybe the next 2 days, and then after that, if they don't respond, maybe wait a week. After a while of thinking, oh, I got to get back to that person. I haven't gotten back to that person. Eventually, could get back to you. Isn't usually that's what happens in my experience. So don't overcomplicate behavior. Save yourself emotional time and energy, right? Work and productivity. Why didn't my project get approved? Well, my boss must secretly hate me, or maybe there's an office conspiracy, right? So maybe the project just wasn't aligned with the goals of the company at that point in time, or didn't meet certain criteria, or weren't aligned with current policies or priorities. Basically, why is that a great example here? Why is this such a great example? Is because sometimes we have this idea of why something isn't being approved or why something isn't going through. But if we boil it down to the simplest explanation and identify that as a possible cause first, then we go into we can list out potential solutions. It actually brings us to potential solutions. So for instance, if it wasn't aligned, how could I make it more aligned? If it didn't meet certain criteria, maybe I could ask to clarify what are specific criteria that this must meet. You see how this actually can be very, very clarifying. But if we're jumping to different conclusions beforehand, it's not. Everyday tech troubles. Why isn't my Wi-Fi working? All right, I'll go through this pretty simply, right? You accidentally unplug the router. Check that first, right? So we waste a lot of time. Self-improvement. Why am I not making progress? Maybe I need a more complex morning routine. Oh my gosh, don't we all talk about this? The morning routine that made me a millionaire. Like, sorry, BS. That's not true. No morning routine made somebody a millionaire. Okay, there were other factors, but that's a lot of stuff that we do. This happens the most in self-improvement. This happens the most, and I've seen it again, firsthand. And I've done it. And I'm sure you've done it too. So, there's this thing I think I need to get better at. And you do everything but the thing that you need to do, right? You do the morning routine, you try a new productivity app, whatever you do. And you're doing everything but the thing you need to work on in order to grow personally. I need to read 10 books first, right? You see how Occam's razor, thinking in terms of Occam's razor, can actually help you go right to the source of what you need to do, especially with personal growth. I think it's the best thing with personal growth as well. Rational thinking, why did I get a headache? So people say 5G waves, getting a brain tumor, there's a food additive I read about online. Right? Okay, so obviously this is a great example as well. So why is gas more expensive now? Well, there's a secret agenda, global manipulation scheme. Well, think about the most likely causes, right? Supply chain disruptions, there's seasonal demand, policy changes. In reality, there is, let's be real, there's no president or no single person, even a president or a prime minister, there's no single head of state that is fully in control of like the prices of things. Yeah. I mean, people like to take credit for things or blame people when things go wrong because it's like, that person's in charge right now, so it's politically convenient. But the truth is that they're not, you can do things to mitigate, but they're not really totally in control of prices of things, right? Parenting or teaching, right? So that's an example. You can pause the video and look at that again. I'm gonna dive into some of these more specifically and then pass over some of them more quickly. Of course, again, you have the video, you can pause. So finances, why am I always broke at the end of the month? The system is rigged, banks are stealing from me, or I just have bad luck. No, I will say, yes, the system is unfair, right? Whatever you call the system, you'd have to clarify that. What is the system? But because people use that word, like throw that word around all the time. But I think, financial institutions and things, the way things work, there aren't enough opportunities for people and all of that. But let's go to the most immediate, right? It's so abstract. Why not? Because in being abstract as a problem, it's not simple enough, right? Let's not consider that first as the cause. Let's go to our personal budgeting first, obviously, and just see how can I improve my financial situation at the end of each month. It's not really, even if, and it is, system is unfair. Great. I agree. Things are unfair. It sucks. We should change it. But at the same time, we need to take action, don't we? We need to take some action and make it so that we're not in that situation as much as to the fullest of our ability, right? And exert some agency, right? And why wasn't I invited to that event? We'll skip over that a little bit. Of course, you can pause and look at that. Why am I anxious all the time? Daily annoyances, right? We talked about the person cutting off in traffic. But I also want to talk about the business example. So the business example, why isn't my business growing faster? This is perfect. If you're interested in entrepreneurship, or you're in entrepreneurship, or you're in business or whatever. So here is like, maybe my branding isn't subtle enough, or my funnel needs like this 7-step, system, or, email marketing, or I need to split test and blah, 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 right? How many people in business, if you're an entrepreneur or you've done business with people, how many people have thought like that? So often, all the time. And I like actually how Alex Hormozi talks a lot about this. He's not the only one who talks about this by far, but he's the most popular one who talks about this. But, look at the simplest explanation. Try to simplify. And what we want to do is, the 80-20 rule, or what some people call the Pareto principle. Actually, the Pareto principle is from Occam's razor, really. In a way, it is. It's based on Occam's razor. And maybe it's just you're spending time on low impact tasks. Where is the 20% of activities that give you the 80% of the return? And usually that's like that. And what are the 80% of activities you're spending time on that just make you feel good? And trust me, I've been there. Like, they make you feel productive. They make you feel like you're getting things done. But when you really look at it, those things don't mean anything to actual results. They're just making you feel like, okay, I feel good about myself because I'm doing things, which, that's not how it works. So that is, those are some ways to use Occam's razor. I hope you use them in your everyday life. I will see you in the next video.